Hi guys, I am coming to you one last final time from our classroom in the Student Ministry building. And when you get done with this lecture and you take good notes, you will be ready to take our last test. That test is going to cover unemployment and taxation. If you've done the lectures from last week and this week, taken good notes, you should be prepared. So I want to jump right into this. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about taxation, but in this lecture, we're going to talk a little bit more about the efficiency of taxation, what makes taxation inefficient, what are some things to watch out for, some pitfalls. And then we'll also talk about equity and what do we mean when we say that taxes should be equitable in a nation, and ask ourselves the question, are they or aren't they? Before we launch into that subject, I do want to point out something that ManQ talks about on pages 246 to 248. When you turn there, you're going to notice that there's a section called Case Study. All right, and what it's presenting is part of the problem with why the United States is paying out so much more than we're taking in revenue. Despite the taxation in the United States on incomes, on all kinds of levels of income, like we learned last week, on sales, on property, despite all of that, we still have a large payment on debt, and we continue to have budget deficits every single year, and these are only growing. Now, I'm talking again about before the coronavirus type of deficit spending, okay, which is at an extreme that we've never seen before. But what I'm talking about is the consistent deficit spending that happens particularly on the elderly in the form of transfer payments, like we talked about last week, specifically talking about Social Security and Medicare. And ManQ addresses this issue in the section called Case Study, pages 246 to 248. So what I'd like you to do is stop the video right now and read through that short section so that we can discuss it intelligently. So go ahead and read it. Okay, so ManQ calls this topic of transfer payments, specifically Social Security and Medicare payments to the elderly, an open question, right? He refers to it as an open question in the text. So what does he mean by an open question? Well, what he means is it doesn't matter what side of the political aisle you're on. It doesn't matter whether you're a liberal economist, a classical liberal, whether you're a left-leaning economist, whether you're a libertarian. Everybody sees the same problem. It's an open question that really the political parties, have not had a significant answer to. And I'm going to talk about the politics of it in a little bit. But the open question is, how are we going to pay for this? Okay, because there are certain realities that no one can wave a magic wand and make go away about our country and this topic of transfer payments and Medicare. Okay, so the open question is, how are we going to keep doing this? How do we make the Social Security program viable in the future? And how do we keep Medicare viable in the future? And I'm going to go on the assumption that that we want to do this. Now, if you're a libertarian or maybe some conservatives, you might say, well, I don't like these programs to begin with. I don't think they ever should have been instituted. Well, the problem with that is that you have multiple generations that have been told that this will be there for them. They have built their retirement structure around it being there for them. And in addition to that, they have paid in. Remember that with only the exception for clergy, it is illegal not to pay into the Social Security system and into Medicare. Every day of every American's working life, they have had payroll taxes taken, remember that 7.1%, right? They've had that taken out of their check, and their employer has also contributed to Social Security. So to just say, well, this program is irresponsible and isn't going to last, well, the problem is you have all these people that have been promised something to. I remember years and years and years ago, it got to be 15 years ago now, one of the AP US History DBQs was on the New Deal. and you know how sometimes they'll have pictures, diagrams, and they had a description of the Social Security system that FDR was devising, and it said a monthly check to you in this very 30s, 40s-esque cartoon and font, a monthly check to you for the rest of your life. Right? That's how it was sold to people, that you're going to get this monthly check that's going to take care of you, right? It's going to help you in your retirement years, and you're going to pay now and collect later. The problem is that no one tries to argue that the money going to tomorrow's senior citizens, or to you guys, or to me, because we're all in the working labor force now in our age, right? We are considered employable. None of us, no one is telling us that the money that we're paying in today is being held in some kind of account for us for the future. Okay? Nobody even pretends that. The reality is that the next generation will need to pay for our retirement in this setup, and that working people right now are paying for the elderly who are now on or on their way to retirement. So that is a system that was not originally as it was set up, and the question is, what are we going to do about it? So let's look at what some of the things that ManQ says are just some facts in dealing with this reality, okay? So first of all, first fact that we want to deal with is that the elderly population is growing. And one of the reasons the elderly population is growing is that life expectancy is growing, okay? So the number of years that a person lives is extending. I believe ManQ said, a 17-year difference in life expectancy from when this program was first instituted. And so the longer people live, and we would say that's a good thing, extending life is a good thing, but the longer people live, the more years they're going to need to be paid out of this system, okay? And so people are still, in general, because I don't want any of you writing me emails and saying, well, I know someone who works when they're 80. Of course you do, okay? But what we're trying to say is we still have the retirement model that we did at a much earlier time in history, okay, with a different life expectancy. So your working years are the same, but your years in retirement and thus being paid out to in this system are extended. So the growth of life expectancy is one big factor, okay? So you're more likely to live longer. What's going down? Well, what's going down is the number of children that couples are having in the United States. So whereas previously in history, maybe an average family was 3, or it wouldn't be uncommon to see a family of 4. Now we have the famous, it's 1.2 children per couple in the United States, right? In other words, the number of children being born has gone down, and this is due to preferences, this is due to birth control, this is due to societal change and what people think is a normal family, what people want to do with their time, money, and energy, what they plan on doing for their children financially, a whole bunch of reasons. Marriage is also down, which is another reason why the number of children are down. So the number of children being born, and therefore the labor force is down. The number of people actively working, okay, versus the number of people who depend on those people, all right, is widening. Okay, that gap is widening. So, and it will continue to be true. As the number of children born continue to go down, you have a greater, what you call as the dependency ratio. The dependency ratio is covered in another part of ManQ's text, but it basically is saying count up all the people who live off of the workers. This would include babies, children, stay-at-home parents, and it would also include retirees, okay? People with disabilities, all the people who rely on the workers over the workers, right? That's the dependency ratio. So the dependency ratio is growing, and the number of people entering the labor force is getting lower. Of course, some of this you have to understand sociologically. If you understand what the baby boomer generation means, I understand and know that people have very loose definitions. And let me throw out to you guys very of late disrespectful definitions of baby boomers. And I hope that you guys don't just join into a societal trend of discounting people who are made in God's image and people who have contributed to this country and this country's military and this country's working force. And these people are your grandparents and your great grandparents. Nonetheless, okay, baby boomer is a term that gets thrown around all the time, and it's thrown around rather sloppily. It does mean something, okay? Baby boomers, all right? Baby boomers were born within specific years. Somebody isn't a baby boomer just because they feel like saying they are, okay? Or because somebody in their life says, oh, well, I'm from the baby boomer generation, or someone calls them that. No, baby boomers were born between 1946, right, after World War II was over, and 1964. This is the definition of a baby boomer. And what we mean by a baby boomer is a person born when there were lots and lots and lots of children being born in the United States. The baby boom was a time when America was done with war, looking for normality, or as some people call it, normalcy. They were looking to go out to the suburbs to have the American dream. Okay, they were relieved at not being involved in these worldwide cataclysmic events. And we had a financially healthy time throughout the 1950s, okay, and early 1960s. And so you had a baby boom. And these baby boomers are now grown up and they've reached retirement age. And so they are largely and getting to be almost fully into the retirement sector now, and those people are all collecting Social Security and they're on Medicare. The problem is that not only are the number of children going down, okay, there's also young people dropping out of the labor force, as we talked about last week and read that article last week. And so this is a very tricky scenario that we're dealing with. You can see that that's a second issue, okay? Another thing that's on the rise, we've got rising years that you're expected to live, lowered amount of children being born, and lower people in labor force with more people that depend on them. Another thing that's going up is just the cost of healthcare. Now, unfortunately, guys, we don't have a lot of time to talk about the healthcare costs. And why they're going up and what all of the problems are. If we were back in our old ways, we'd probably go off onto a rabbit trail today about the cost of the healthcare system, which is important, it is super valuable, and we probably wouldn't finish our lesson on taxation. I'm not going to do that today, but there is a great rise in the cost of healthcare, and those costs continue to escalate at amazing levels. You know, guys, nothing else in our economy inflates like the cost of healthcare. When the school pays, of course, for our employees' insurance. And employees, we all contribute to our healthcare plan, but the school pays the lion's share of people's healthcare. And that's traditional in the United States, that your healthcare policy is often tied to your employment or your spouse's employment. Or your parents' employment. But, you know, when the school talks with our insurers each year, there's often times when we're told, well, there's going to be a 10 or 15% increase in what it costs to insure your employees this year. That is a huge, can you imagine having a 10 or 15% increase in your rent or in your mortgage or in your groceries? This is a sector of our economy that has growth that doesn't match GDP. It doesn't match other inflation levels. Healthcare costs, there's a lot of reasons for why these costs are out of control. Remember when we talked about gallon of gas awareness or gallon of milk awareness, how people know what they are going to pay for a gallon of milk or what they're going to pay for a gallon of gas? Let me tell you something. There's no price awareness in medicine. There's no way. I mean, you can go into medical offices and ask, what does it cost to have this service done? What will it cost me to get a flu shot? What will it cost me to get a checkup? And they'll just look at you because we have very few people that pay for their medical care directly. It's all done through third-party payers, whether that be private insurers or Medicaid or Medicare. That's how almost everybody pays for their Medicare. It's very rare that you have a cash payer. And you know what? When you don't have a cash payer, or you don't have people paying out of a health savings account where they know what something costs, you just hand over your insurance card. And some of you have probably been to the doctor where your visit costs $10 or $5 or $20 because you're paying a copay. We can't go into all of this. Okay, I said I wasn't going to, but the costs of healthcare are rising by a lot. Some of that is because of increased life expectancy. Some of it because we have more medicines available to us and better treatment available to us. And some of that is because we don't have good price awareness in the healthcare system. Nonetheless, the costs of healthcare are going up, and they go up every single year. So that adds another layer to this problem. You got people living longer, you got less people paying into the system, and the system's becoming more expensive. I hope you can see that we've got a recipe for disaster here, okay? Lastly, you have more people qualifying. And this is true both because of the age issue, okay, that I talked about, but also because more people qualify for Medicaid than they have before. Now, Medicaid, remember, is the means-tested form of this, where Medicaid means that you are, you qualify through a lack of income, through a low income level, to receive welfare health care. Okay, that's what it is. It's means-tested health care, not Medicare, where you're 65, and I don't care if you're the richest guy on the golf course or the poorest guy, you get Medicare because you made it to 65, okay? I'm talking about means-tested Medicaid, which can be given to anywhere from an infant all the way up. Elderly people, they often, I shouldn't say often, some elderly people get both Medicaid and Medicare. Medicare covers the large part, and Medicaid covers whatever would be out of their pocket, okay? Some elderly people that have Medicare, they'll go and you'll see these advertisements if you're watching a show that older people watch, or you're listening to the radio, because apparently old people only listen to the radio, and me, and I don't consider myself that old yet, but we will hear these things about Medicare Part B or supplemental Medicare insurance. That's because Medicare will pay this much of the percentage, and then there's always a part that the person contributes. So people will go out and they'll get gap insurance. They'll get insurance that covers this amount. And so then their Medicare will pay this part, and their supplemental policy will pay this part, and they won't have any out-of-pocket costs for their health care in their old age, right? People who don't have money to do that, they might apply for Medicaid. So Medicare will cover this part, and Medicaid will cover the other part. All right? But more people qualify to be on these programs than ever before, both Medicaid and Medicare. Medicare because more people are reaching the elderly age, and there are more of them, and Medicaid because people are putting more people onto social safety nets. Okay? Makes sense? So all of this together tells you a problem, that there isn't the money to pay for this. This cannot work. There's no economist that claims that it can work. Not any Democrat, not any Republican, not any libertarian, not any populist. Okay? No one says that this is a workable number, because it's not workable and there are facts in the universe. The question is what to do about it. That's the question. And there's a lot of different thoughts about what a society can do to fix this problem. And Mankiw mentioned a few of them. Okay, so what do? Well, you can raise taxes. You can raise taxes on the working class, okay? You can't really raise taxes on the people who are retired because they're on a fixed income, all right? But you can raise taxes on the working class and try to put more money aside because you know that this future is coming. And we're talking in this chapter about taxation and whether or not raising taxes is always a good idea. So I'll just put that out there for now and leave it. Some people think this is a good idea. Some people think this is a bad idea. You could raise the retirement age. You could raise the retirement age. Again, some people think this is a good idea. Some people think this is a terrible idea. Some people would just simply look at this and they'd say, well, look, I mean, people can live longer. That means they can work longer. And so we should raise the retirement age to 70, right? From 65. And then we'd have less years that the people are being paid out and they can stay in the workforce longer. Well, that has a set of issues. First of all, some people would say, well, maybe I don't want to work till I'm 70 years old. And I was promised that I could retire at 65, and I paid my dues. I've paid into this system my whole life. You can't turn around and bait and switch me now and say, well, now I got to go keep a job until I'm 70 years old, right? Some people would say, I'm going to use all the best years of my life at work when I was promised, okay? This isn't people being lazy. This is people who were promised something from the government and forced to contribute. They didn't have a choice. And now to say to them, oh, well, surprise, now your age is 70. That'd be a little bit of a difficult thing to do. Some people think this is a great idea because it can solve the problem at least somewhat on that retirement age, and then you just automatically deduct 5 years of payments and add in more working time, and you can help alleviate some of the problem that way. Okay? Some people think that Social Security and Medicare should be means tested. Means tested again, meaning that you look at a person's means and ability to live and you either give it to them or don't based on what they make. And so some people think that'd be a great idea. Remember the rich guy in the golf course I just mentioned? Why is the rich guy in the golf course getting a Social Security check? Why is the rich guy in the golf course having his medical care paid by Medicare when he maybe has $1 million in the bank? Why are we doing that, right? Well, the reason why we're doing that is because the rich guy in the golf course was required to pay into the system every year of his working life since the time he was 16 years old. And so this has never been a means-tested program. The intention of this program, the way it was sold to the American people back in the 30s, and every year since then, it's never been means tested. This was supposed to be a safety net for retirees, and it was promised to everyone. So to suddenly turn around and say, well, you shouldn't take this because you have the money, is a little bit of, like I said, a bait and switch. It's like, well, we're going to make you contribute to this every year of your working life, but then when you get to 65, we're going to try to say somehow you don't deserve this because you already have money. Well, that's true, but money was removed from these people's paychecks for a lifetime, right? And so some people would say, yeah, but it should be about more equity. It shouldn't be about fairness. It should be about what works for those people. Remember our things that we discussed a couple of weeks ago as far as just philosophies about government and what it should be doing, and should government be making things fair and equal, or should government be staying out of people's business? That all has to do with what you think about that idea about it being means tested. Okay, I'm going to throw on another one. Some people think that you can't fix the problem for now. You just have to live with this problem and debt spend, which is what we're doing now to solve it. And you are going to have to live with the fact that the baby boomers have retired and we've kind of messed this up and there aren't enough working age people to support them. So just debt spend it, but you've got to get in there and fix the problem for the next generations. And some people believe that younger workers should be allowed to opt out of Social Security. They believe that right now you should say we have to care for the people who we made this promise to who are already at retirement age or approaching retirement age. But we're going to go to these young people and we're going to say to these young people, do you want in Social Security or do you want out? Because if you opt out and you say, I will provide my own retirement and my own savings, my own money, then you don't have to pay the payroll taxes, okay? We'll handle that another way. You don't have to pay the payroll taxes, but also when you reach 65 or if you have a crisis or whatever, you cannot apply for Social Security. You're out. You chose to provide for your own retirement and not take this safety net, and you're allowed to opt out of the system. Keep your money. And in that, you can go invest it, you can go put it in a bank account, you can go put it in the stock market, you can go do whatever you want with it, and save the money for your future. Or you can spend it all on ice cream and hamburgers and not have any money when you retire. Now, if you're thinking, well, that is a horrible idea because everyone will do that. Well, if you're on a certain side of the political agenda, you're going to say, but that's people's responsibility. People can make choices, and they do make choices. In this system, there are no choices, okay? In this system, the government is saying, we're gonna take this for you and we're gonna put it in an account. Now, I'll try to find you some video commentary to post underneath this video that explores a little bit about what a person might have in terms of a retirement income if they were allowed to invest that money on their own rather than to contribute it to a government planned program. And you might say, well, it depends on how well they invest it. Yes, that is the point. And it also depends on the stock market. It depends on, but government's fortunes also are dependent on things, as we're seeing from this virus. So here are some potential, right? There's pros and cons to each of these in terms of what people think politically, but no one argues that this is not the problem that we're facing as a society. So I want you to know about it. I want you to understand it. Look and see if I found a support videos for you to take a look at, what things might be like if people were allowed to opt out. By the way, if this is an idea, or this is an idea, or this is an idea, or this is an idea, why hasn't it been done? The reason why is that these are all, depending on the group you're in, very politically unpopular. Okay, very politically unpopular. Old people who are already at retirement age or nearing it don't want to be told, oh, guess what, work 5 more years after you've paid. Old people are very afraid of opt-outs. They believe that if you allow the young generation to opt out, you're canceling out their Social Security. This happened to George W. Bush when he was president. He tried to talk about opting out and tried to actually address this problem, and he got slaughtered for it. And I'm going to tell you, one of the places that he got slaughtered for it was by Republicans in the state of Florida. And the reason why isn't because these Republicans didn't agree with him about the problem. And it's not even because they disagreed with him about this solution being viable. It's because Florida has a large number of elderly voters. And elderly voters get very worried when you start talking about pulling out their retirement security. And so they were opposed to this idea en masse, even though the idea was meant to guarantee that they would continue getting their Social Security payments, and it would be this generation opting out of paying itself. They didn't believe that would really happen. And so the idea of opting out of Social Security and Medicare was radically opposed by both Republicans and Democrats. And any politician who dares to bring it up is going to get hit with rotten tomatoes, okay? So I wanted you to know about that, to think about it, to deal with it, to know when you come across the problem, the open question that we're all dealing with. And we're going to move on and talk a little bit more about some different issues in taxation. Okay, before we talk about tax efficiency, let me just say one thing. We've been talking a lot about the federal collection of income taxes, etc. Manky goes into a short section about state and local taxes. Where do most state and local entities get their taxes, money from, their tax revenue from? Number one is property tax, sales tax, and there are various and sundry other taxes like gasoline taxes, taxes on specific goods, licenses, tolls, things like that. This is where the states get their money from. Of course, remember, you guys are experts, and I hope that you got to share some of this knowledge maybe on your AP exam, depending on the questions you got. You guys are experts about grants, and so we know that part of where states get their money to spend is also from different types of grants that are federal grants. So states have their own money that they get from taxation at the state level, and like we said last week, or earlier this week, some taxes some states have an income tax in addition to the federal income tax, and some states do not. Florida does not have a state income tax, but we do have property taxes, sales taxes, etc. We also make tax money off of revenue from tourists. We, in Florida especially, bring in a lot of tax money each year from non-Florida residents who come here, and they pay resort fees, they pay resort taxes, they pay tolls on our highways, they pay parking at our beaches, and we charge them these fees so that we can generate revenue in the state of Florida. And that's why canceling a summer and a spring like the coronavirus has threatened to do is very difficult on the Florida budget, okay? And it's why Florida, one of the reasons why Florida feels the need to reopen more quickly, because we depend on outside tourism money, not just our businesses, but also our government revenue. All right, let me jump into the efficiency issue, okay? So when we talk about collecting taxes, we want those taxes to be collected efficiently. Now, let me say this, okay? When I'm talking about collecting taxes efficiently, I don't mean, oh, well, the best way to collect them is take them right out of people's paychecks or take it right out of people's bank account. That's efficient. That's not what I mean. I don't mean the collection being efficient. I mean that the way that the tax system is defined is designed, is not self-defeating. It's not self-defeating. So imagine if you have a tax that's actually doing the opposite of what you want it to do. So let's just talk turkey here. Why do governments have taxation? Why do governments tax people? The reason why is because they need revenue. They want to bring in revenue. They want to bring in money. Governments don't produce anything. Well, I think governments are wonderful. I want to work in government. That's great. Okay. I worked in government too. But governments are not producers. Okay. Governments are institutions designed to provide certain securities like life, liberty, property, etc. We've all talked about the theory of government, right? Throughout your years of being educated. But governments are not producers. The government doesn't go out there and sell something that it makes. Right? The government doesn't go out there and produce weapons. They buy weapons from a manufacturer for the military, but they don't produce them themselves. Right? Governments don't set up a lemonade stand to raise money. When governments want money, when governments want revenue, they tax people. Whether those taxes are sales taxes, property taxes, income taxes, any of the above, excise taxes, taxes on foreigners, taxes on residents. When governments want money, they have to tax. And so we're saying that it doesn't make any sense if a government is taxing people in ways that cause what's called deadweight losses. You do not want deadweight losses in your tax system. Let's explain what a deadweight loss is, okay? And we're just going to use Manicue's example because it's there and it's easy, and if you don't understand what I'm saying, you can go back and read it to yourself, okay? So imagine that there are some pizzas for sale, and that these pizzas cost $5 a piece, okay? These pizzas cost $5 a piece. Now, knowing what we know about supply and demand, right, we know that some people will be interested in buying that pizza at $5, and some people will not be interested in buying that pizza at $5. But let's say that we've got two people right here, okay? I can't remember the names that Manicure uses. Jack and Jill is what we're going to say. And Jack and Jill both are interested in buying a pizza at $5. They value that pizza at that level. That's the price it costs. They're willing to buy in at $5. But let's say that the government is taxing the pizza at $2 per pie, which means that even though the pizza is $5, there's a $2 taxation or $2 surcharge added, and now a pizza costs $7. So, in our example, Jack is still going to buy that pizza at $7, but Jill, she's out. She is going to change her behavior economically because she can't or won't, for whatever reason, the $7, she no longer has desire, ability, or willingness to buy a pizza for that price. And so she doesn't buy one. Well, what has just happened is that this pizza, which now no longer has a demand, will never be made. Okay? This pizza is now lost to the society. Jill has changed her mind. All right? And even though Jack is still getting one, he gets his pizza and he benefits. There are deadweight losses. Because here's the problem. In not buying the pizza, the government just lost this $2 in revenue, but also the businesses that produce the pizza lost it. Jill didn't gain anything by not having a pizza. Jack still has what he wants. The question that we're trying to answer is, by taxing the pizza, did the government benefit? And the answer is no. Because what they did unintentionally, remember Sol, he says that sometimes when governments make decisions or anyone makes decisions, it doesn't always have the intended consequences. Sometimes it has consequences that we didn't intend. And so the government thought, oh, we're going to make $4 here, okay? We're going to make $4 off of these two customers. But they didn't make that. They only made $2. And the only thing that it accomplished is that Jill can't have a pizza, that the people who make pizza aren't making as many, and they don't have any revenue. That's called a deadweight loss. It means when you have a tax system that is meant to raise money, but instead doesn't raise money, and key, ready, negatively alters consumer behavior. As economists, we would say if you're taxing people out of feeling that they can spend money in the marketplace, you're probably not doing what you wanted to do, okay? And so think about what this could cause. Not only does Jill not get her pizza, but the people who work in the pizza place may or may not continue to have the same wages if this is a wide-scale problem, okay? You gotta blow this up to a macro level. More people will probably need more government assistance and more government help. And by the way, they also won't pay into the system. So the pizza owner, as his pizza sales go down, he won't contribute his income, because his income won't be as high to the federal revenue package. There'll be no corporate income to the federal revenue package, or very little. And so the total government revenue is actually going down. And that's not what governments want. Governments don't want their revenue to go down. They want their revenue to go up. But sometimes their behavior has the unintended consequences of a deadweight loss. Okay, got that? So one thing when we talk about efficiency is we don't want any deadweight losses. We don't want taxation to alter behavior in a negative way that causes a loss for both individuals and the government's total revenue. When could you have a deadweight loss on a wider scale? Well, you can do a deadweight loss when you cause people to negatively impact their own behavior and decision making because they're afraid of being taxed. Go back to the marginal tax rate discussion we had earlier in the week. If a person is looking at a marginal tax rate and they're saying, well, if I go up to the next level of income, I'm going to get taxed more than if I stayed at this level of income, then I'm not going to go to the next level. I won't take that promotion. I won't work more hours. I won't make more money. Guess who that loses money for? The worker, the business, and the government. Everyone loses. That's called a deadweight loss. And by the way, if you tend to be on the side of, yeah, but don't taxes do wonderful things for the poor, and this transfer payment is interesting to me because I believe that you should transfer payments, guess what? If the government does not have revenue, there's no money to transfer to the poor. Okay, I might disagree with you about that even being a valid form of a way for a society to work, but let's just say that we're going to go there and we're going to say, yes, we believe in wealth transfer, massive wealth transfer. Guess what? If the wealth isn't being created because of deadweight losses, there isn't the wealth to transfer. Okay, if people don't want to go out and generate and make money and start businesses and get promotions and open small side businesses and be creative and innovate because they're afraid of being taxed at those levels, then there's no money created to be transferred. So deadweight losses are something that we can just say straight out. It's not an opinion. It's an inefficiency that governments need to avoid. We're going to move on to another issue of efficiency. All right, I don't want to make this video too much longer, guys. I know that you're hoping that class is going to be over soon. The next thing we want to talk about efficiency is administrative burden. Okay, the administrative burden is what it costs to make the taxes happen and get collected. Okay, I want you to kind of think of this as the price that it costs to collect taxes in the first place. There is an administrative side to adding taxes onto things. knowing what things should be taxed and shouldn't be taxed, knowing how to collect it, how to get it to the government, what do you do with certain taxation laws for certain people, how do you determine what property taxation is. So think about the office of property tax appraiser, okay? In election years, we elect a property tax appraiser. We have a property tax office. Probably some of you have been to it before. It's the same place where you can get your license plate or things like that down in Inverness. And so the tax appraiser, their job is to determine how much a home's value or property's value is worth, then how much that home should be taxed, at what rate. Go back to that thing I told you to ask your parents about homestead exemption or not, what type of property is commercial, home property, domestic, residential property, all that kind of thing, right? All of this is what the property tax appraiser does all year long. They decide how much should be collected, how they're going to get it, and then they go out and get it. This is a full-time job, not just for the property tax appraiser, but for a whole office full of people who work for the property tax appraiser and decide. That's the administrative side of a tax. Of course, you have to have some kind of administrative burden for collecting taxes. There's going to be something. But the question is, just how complex do we want this burden to get? If you have lots and lots and lots of employees in a government that are just in there working, deciding how and when and where the tax money is going to come, you've got to pay all those people's salaries. You've got to have buildings for them to work in. You've got to air condition those buildings. You got to pay their health insurance. Do you see what's happening? Just those people who are out there just to get the money decided and in represent an administrative burden. And that means it's not coming to the government general revenue, it's going out. So you want to keep those administrative burdens low. Think about it from the consumer side. One thing that most people will do is they'll seek tax advice. Okay, they'll seek tax advice, and some people that have a low-level amount that they're paying, they might seek their tax advice from a thing like TurboTax, a computer program that helps them navigate the tax process. Ask your parents what they did when they filed their taxes this year. Did they use a program like a TurboTax, a software program where it walks them through and says, what did you make? Enter this amount. What did you do here? What did you do here? What did you do here? And it tabulates and it gives little hints that come in, and then they file it at the end. Or maybe their taxes are a little bit more complex, especially if they're a business owner, or they have a lot of investments, or they have inheritance, or they have something that complicates. Maybe a small business, they work for a nonprofit, something like that. When you have more complicated taxes, you're going to go to an accountant or a tax lawyer. And these people are going to help you navigate an extremely complex tax code. Okay, people go their whole lives, okay, they go to school to be lawyers, they get a special tax law certificate after they graduate from law school, and they have to keep going back to school, keep being educated every single year in order to stay current with the US tax code, because it's always changing, it's always morphing. And those tax brackets are also always morphing, as you saw last week when we looked at the 2020 numbers. And so taxes themselves have an administrative burden. And if the whole point of government taxing people is to get money so that they can have something that they can spend and accomplish their goals, I don't care whether the government's goals are buying lots of nukes or putting braces on every kid in America, okay, whether those goals are very, very, very military, defense-minded, or whether those goals are health-minded, or whether those goals are paying for psychological counseling for everybody in the United States, whether they're very, social, whatever the goals are, the bottom line is all governments want more money. And if they want more money, okay, then they want to not have deadweight losses, not change people's behavior in a negative way that causes them to lose the revenue they're trying to get in the first place, and they don't want administrative burdens that take away the very tax money that they're trying to get, the very revenue that they're trying to get. So one thing that we have to ask in our efficiency is, do we have a lot of dead weight loss, and do we have administrative burdens that are defeating the purposes of our tax code to begin with? All right? All right, we're going to talk about efficiency. I mean, we just did talk about efficiency, sorry. We're going to talk about equitability. Okay, before we move on to what's equitable or fair in taxation, I would encourage you, even though you're coming to the end of your education, to take a quick look on page 252. There's a little fun example there about Iceland and what happened in a particular year that Iceland decided to switch how they were collecting taxes. They went from a version where they were collecting taxes before the fact to after the fact, or maybe reversed. I can't remember. Like, in other words, are you paying on what you already made or what you're going to make, et cetera, et cetera. And so they didn't collect. On a year's worth of work marginal tax rate. And it has a really interesting effect. What happened when the citizens of Iceland realized that they could make a significant more amount of money than they normally could, and that money that they made in that year only would be tax-free. And what they did as far as their productivity and their attention to work in that year. It's a pretty interesting little example. It's on page 252. It's worth your time. All right, we're going to get into the topic of what's fair. All right, when we get into taxes, we want to talk about what's fair. And there are all kinds of ideas about what is fair and what is right and what is just when it comes to taxation. I'm going to talk about two principles, then we're going to talk about what the realities are, and then we are going to be done. All right, ready? Here we go. First of all, the benefits principle. Some people say, well, when you are determining what a person should pay, you should consider what benefit they make off of the taxes, and that should be a good tell as to what they should pay. So these people would argue, the benefits principle people, they would say, well, if a person stands to benefit more from living in a society that are providing certain benefits, they should pay more. So for instance, they would say, well, people who own businesses all over the country, and they're trucking materials to those businesses, and they're using highways, and they're using air traffic control, the benefits of air traffic control, and they're using the US postal system, and they are using the airwaves to advertise, right? Those people are all benefiting in a greater way from the infrastructure of the United States, and so then they should pay more. Okay, they should pay more. And so the more you use what the government provides, the more you should pay. This essentially goes back to the rich should pay more, because these people would say something to the effect of, well, since a richer person owns much more property, and that property needs to be protected by police or military, then they should pay more into the system because they are the ones causing the need for all of the protection, the rebuilding of roads, bridges, et cetera, the benefits principle. People who aren't big fans of this would say, well, yeah, but these people, okay, they're also creating the wealth. In other words, by trucking themselves around the country and shipping things and using air traffic control, they're also providing these jobs. So they would say, yeah, well, you're kind of asking them to pay, right? They already gave at the office, they would say, by creating jobs in air traffic control for bridge builders, for people who work on highways, for people who work in radio, for advertisers, right? By creating all those things, they're the job creators. And so they shouldn't be penalized for using these services. They should be thanked that these services even are needed because they're the ones generating wealth in a society. You understand? That's what the benefits principle says. Another principle that people have come up with is the ability to pay. This is the people who would just simply say, well, if you pay more, then you should if you make more, you can pay more, you should shoulder more of the burden, okay? They would reject any idea of certainly a lump sum tax, but also a proportional tax. They would say, well, you know, it doesn't make, these people would be very against the idea of everybody pays a flat tax, like everybody pays 14% of their income, or everybody pays 10% of their income. No. They believe that the ability to pay determines. So simply if, it doesn't matter what you do, it doesn't matter where you got the money, it doesn't matter what you use, if you have more ability to pay, you should be taxed more. If you have less ability to pay, you should be taxed less. And these people believe in a transference of wealth, okay? They believe that a government's role is to transfer wealth from haves to have-nots, and that's more equitable. That's their belief about equity. All right, so let's just close out, all right, by talking about what really is true, okay, as far as how we collect taxes in the United States. Three things. Number one, you can have, well, you can have a lump sum tax, okay? You can have a proportional tax. You can have regressive tax, and you can have progressive tax. Schemes of taxation. Different people who define fairness, justice, rightness, truth, goodness. They define those things differently, which is why it matters, guys, how we define these things, because it has pragmatic outlay to real people's lives. All right? They answer these questions with one of these tax schemes. Okay? Mankiw describes the lump sum as the government just sets a price. Let's say they say, everyone owes the king $1,000. We're going to send the sheriff of Nottingham out, and when he gets there, you better have 1,000 pence to pay, right? Or a gold coin, a lump sum tax. They'll come by every single person's home and say, the king is here to call up his dues. It's $1,000. It's a lump sum tax. Very few societies, obviously, have a lump sum tax, all right? So let's talk about what you might see in reality, a proportional tax. So proportional tax is everyone pays the same percentage, but of course they pay, right, proportionally, but they pay a very different amount. So I think I talked about this a little bit last week when I gave an example, right? If a person makes $10,000, $100,000, or $1 million, right? I think I gave Madison and Hunter and maybe Rachel or somebody as examples, right? So if, let's just use 10% because it's easy. If there's a proportional tax of 10% on these incomes, then this person who's a $10,000 a year maker will pay $1,000. This person will pay $10,000. This person will pay $100,000 to the system. This definitely corresponds to people who make more, pay more. People who make less, pay less. It's proportional though. Everyone pays the same percentage taxes. That's a proportional tax. Okay? This is not what we have in the United States. We do not have a proportional tax system. All right, next, regressive taxes. This is where the poor pay more than the rich. People who have less income pay more than rich people. When on earth would you imagine that? You can't even imagine a society where you said to the poor, you pay more than your rich brothers and sisters. Well, how about the Third Estate in the French Revolution, right? Remember that scheme where the Third Estate paid almost all the taxes in the nation, and the first and second estates were largely exempt from taxation, the nobility and the clergy? That's an example of a country with a regressive tax system. The lump sum tax can be a little bit regressive. Now, you say, well, how can it be regressive? Because the poor aren't paying more. They're paying $1,000 just like everyone else. But guys, listen, okay? For a person, all right, let's look at this same thing here, all right? Let's look at our examples of one person makes 1,000, one person makes 10,000, one person makes 100,000. In a regressive tax, in a lump sum tax, look what this person now makes. $0. This person keeps 9,000. This person keeps 99,000. Do you see how that's regressive? Because the richest people, their contribution is like a drop in the bucket, but the poorest people, their contribution is everything they have. And so that's what we mean by regressive taxes. Now, we do not have a regressive tax system in the United States, but some people criticize some forms of tax as tending toward being regressive taxes. Let me give you a quick example, okay? Some people would say that a sales tax is regressive. Hang with me. As people have come up with ideas for for tax reform. Some people want to see the income tax eliminated totally. Remember, the income tax only came about in the United States in 1913, and so officially, and so by constitutional amendment. It was only temporary before that, after the Civil War. Some people say we should have never had an income tax. It's wrong, and that people should be taxed solely on their property, and we can make all the revenue we need in the United States by raising property taxes but getting rid of all the other taxes. Okay, that's an idea that some people have had. Some people have had an idea to go to a flat tax or a proportional tax. You heard people talk about the flat tax system. It was a real popular book about 10 years ago. They're talking about a proportional tax, 10% on everybody, 15% on everybody. Some people would even say that that number could be a lot higher, like even 20% on everybody, but you would get rid of every other tax. You'd have a proportional tax, and you'd get rid of sales taxes, property taxes, get rid of everything, just have a flat tax and let people know what they're going to pay, and it's proportional. Another idea some people have had is that taxes should be consumption driven. In other words, you can control the tax money that you pay by what you buy. So if you only collected sales taxes, that's the only kind of tax there is, you would raise the taxes quite a bit, you'd raise sales taxes quite a bit, but people could control by what they buy. In other words, if you don't want to pay that much tax, then don't consume that. That's what the people who argue that sales tax is a great way to fix the tax code. Because they say if you do a sales tax, the administrative burden is taken because it's easy. The register rings it up, what's the tax, the government says thank you very much, and you get rid of all the tax lawyers and you get rid of all the administrative burden people, you get rid of all their offices. It's just a simple sales tax, a consumption tax. Well, some people would say that's not a good idea because they would say sales taxes are regressive. Remember, regressive meaning poor people pay more than rich people. Let's talk about how they would argue that that's true, okay? One thing about being poor, and Thomas Sowell says this, one thing about being poor is that it costs a lot to be poor. And what does he mean by that? Well, poor people, because they do not have a lot of resources in the bank, or sometimes they don't have bank accounts at all, and because they don't have savings, and because they don't have a lot of longevity, they don't have investments, they don't have savings accounts, they're living paycheck to paycheck, that means that it costs them a lot of money to be poor. So, an example, okay? People who have money, and they have a car, and they have gas in that car, and they have leisure time after work, they can get in their car and they can drive to a Sam's Club, all right? And they can pay the membership for the Sam's Club, and they can go inside and they can buy things in bulk at a discounted rate. So when they want to buy, let's say that their kids eat a lot of chunky mushroom soup, okay? If their kids eat a lot of chunky mushroom soup, they can go to Sam's and they can buy a case of 50 chunky mushroom soups, right? And this chunky mushroom soup, let's say that when you buy it in bulk, it ends up costing you just $1 per can. Okay, but you're gonna buy 50 cans. So at the register, you just bought $50 worth of soup. Well, for a poor person living paycheck to paycheck, wow, $50 in soup sounds like a lot, especially when you have to pay the rent, the light bill, etc. Now, the person who's paying $50, they're drawing on resources that they've saved. They're drawing on those things. And so, yeah, they're going to take a $50 hit, but they're going to know, but wait a minute, I'm saving money on soup in the long run. You know what the poor person tends to do? Well, the poor person tends to not drive to Sam's on the weekend, not have membership in a price-saving club, not have the gas to go out of town, maybe not have a car, right? And they tend to not have the outlay, not have the money in their wallet to spend $50 on soup at any one time. And you know what that often means? And this is what Thomas Sowell means when he says it costs money to be poor. It means that on the way to school, that poor person will stop oftentimes at a gas station because they're not going to drive out of town to the suburbs. They're going to stop at a gas station on the way, on the highway or off the highway, and they're going to go in and they're going to pay $3.49 for one can of the same soup that if they had bought in bulk, it would only be $1. That is regression. It's not a tax, but in other words, what we're saying is poor people buy a smaller amount of things, smaller number of things grammatically, more often. You know, because you guys are seniors and on your way, I'll share with you that when my kids were little, I sometimes didn't always have life organized super well. And I wasn't, even though I had a Sam's Club membership, I didn't always take the time to plan my meals super well ahead and have everything I needed in the grocery store. Sometimes it'd come down to a Sunday night and I'd be busy grading and doing my lesson planning and preparing for the week. And I just didn't get it together enough to do my meal planning and shopping. And so it'd be Monday morning and I'd be driving the kids to school and I'd think, oh my gosh, they don't have any lunch for the day, and I would go into Circle K, or let's see, back then it was, I guess it was Circle K before they took it down and made it into the mobile station. I'd go in there, or the little gas station that used to be on the corner in Homosassa, where you turn for Homosassa Trail, and I'd go in there and I'd be like, what am I going to get my kids to eat? I got to get them something to put in their lunch because I don't want to send them anything. And I remember one time going in there and getting, they didn't have very much. I didn't know what to get them, and it was wintertime, and I got a thing of chunky soup, right? They sell like above the microwave in those places, and they had these cans of chunky soup that you pull off the plastic, you pull off the metal, you microwave it. I thought, okay, I'll get them that. And I walked up to the counter and I bought it, and the soup was very expensive, right? You could call it highway robbery. It was very expensive, and I knew it for what these cans of soup were. But this is when my kids were little, and this is before everything was done by price scanning, especially like in a little convenience store. And so it had that old-fashioned price tag on it. And I remember that it had this bright neon price tag on the top of the soup, which said some outrageous amount, like $2.79 or $3 or whatever it said, $3.49 for the soup. And I remember that on my way to school in the park, after I got to school in the parking lot, I'm going to put these things in the kids' lunchbox. I was sitting there scraping off the price tag, right? Because I didn't want their teacher to see the price of the soup and think, what on earth? What are they doing, right? Who on earth is, and knowing that I was prepping my kids' lunch down the street at the Circle K every morning, and that I would be willing to make an irresponsible price decision, which is what that was, all right? But the fact is that when you're under circumstances like this, you pay more, okay? And I wasn't poor, mine was just lack of planning, all right? But there are people who are in those situations, and so when we talk about sales taxes being regressive, we're saying that because those people buy smaller and more often, and they also tend to make payments on things, which means they pay longer in interest, that sales taxes can have a regressive effect, that they actually, that kind of tax system, as your whole tax system, will make the poor pay a ton, and the rich who can afford to plan ahead and buy more in bulk and buy less often. And so people would say a sales tax can be a regressive tax. Does that make sense? Okay? And so we do not have a regressive tax system in the United States as far as the whole tax system. What we do have is a progressive tax system. And so very quickly, guys, what this means is that you have brackets, these marginal tax rates that I was showing you the other day. And these brackets mean that the lowest income levels will pay 10% of their income, but that the higher you go, okay, depending on the year's tax bracket you're talking about, that you can pay highest marginal tax increase, highest marginal tax rates right now, I think are 37, maybe it's 36% of your income, your marginal income, for every dollar below the next low dollar, the next level lower, the next stratus lower. So when we talk about a progressive income tax, we mean not the more you make, the more you pay. Look, people, that's a proportional tax. You see it? The more you make, the more you pay into the system. Some people would look at this and they would say, that's equitable. Some people would look at this and say, no, this is equitable. That the more you make, the higher percentage you pay, which is also the more you pay. So in other words, if you make $500,000 or over $518,000, you should have to pay 37% of a good portion of that in income taxes. This does not count all the other kind of taxation that we're talking about. When we talk about these schemes, we're talking about income tax, proportionally, regressively, or progressively. And in the United States, we have progressive income tax, okay? Which means that the more people make, the more they pay. Now, because, ready? All right? Because progressive income rate, tax rates tend to create deadweight losses, all right? They make people's behavior change. They make people say, well, I want to make more money, but I don't want to pay this in taxes. It makes them change their behavior. Because of that, we end up with a very complicated tax code, because you've heard of people getting tax shelters or finding tax loopholes or finding their way around taxes. Well, the reason they're doing that is because they're being penalized at a 37% tax rate, and so they're going to look for ways to shelter their income, delay paying the taxes and put it off till later in life, put the money overseas, put it in investment accounts, give it away, okay? And so progressive taxes tend to create some deadweight losses. So then why, and they create administrative burdens, because you got to hire lawyers and accountants to help you navigate the tax code and save yourself money, okay? So why do we keep doing them? Well, that goes back to the equitability question. The chapter ends with Mankiw, okay, saying that there's a trade-off between equity and efficiency, between what makes sense and what people want and hope to accomplish. Efficiency and equity, right? They would say there's a trade-off between those two things. And so, you know, I want you to think about, guys, as you go on and as you move out from here, there are some, I think, right and wrong answers in this. There's pragmatic and there's knowing all of this, and it's important information to know. You need to think about what you believe about what people own, what they have a right to, if there is such a thing as private property, if there are biblical principles as to how people are allowed to keep or not keep their money, if there are biblical principles about charity, about giving, about force, about government, right? We can know that the Bible says, because Jesus said it himself, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, right? When he was asked about taxation, he said, what Caesar has control of, give it to him, right? That's what he was saying. But Christians are also called to involve themselves in government and governmental policy. And so if Christians see a tax system that is inefficient, or they question its equitability, then they're responsible as voters and as influencers and as people living a significant life and entering into a broken culture to speak out about issues of justice, issues of fairness, issues of property rights, and mistaken intentions, where people think that they're going to create a utopia by tax and spending ourselves into a state of utopia, when history has proven that that's not true. All you have to do is go back in history to the time period when Andrew Mellon was the Secretary of the Treasury, and the United States embarked upon a measure to eliminate deadweight losses. And what they did is they lowered the marginal tax rates across the board, okay, but especially on the rich. And what ended up happening is that the government had more revenue than they'd ever had before. Even though they cut these marginal tax rates across the board, and they gave the heaviest cuts to the richest people, it overall raised revenue. That happened in the 1920s. You should have studied it in US history. And you know what happened again? It happened in the 1980s under Ronald Reagan, because he also cut the top marginal tax rates. And by the way, guys, there have been times in this country when the top marginal tax rate in the country was 90%. It did not mean that our country was at its healthiest or giving away the most money. One thing that can be said for sure is that when taxes, marginal tax rates increase on the rich, charitable giving goes down. And when marginal tax rates are lower, people give more money to charities, to nonprofits. And so you have to ask this question about who's most efficient and who's best at helping the poor. The Bible is very clear that the poor will always be with us, and that there is responsibility for those who have much to help those who have little. But the question of how to go about it, and the question of how best to do it efficiently, and how best to do it with justice while respecting property rights and still showing love and charity as the Bible commands. These are all issues for Christians to think through. And I'm going to leave you with that. If we were in class, we'd have a much wider discussion. But since this video is over an hour, I know you all want to kill me right now, I'm going to wrap it up. So let me just pray for you as we end our class, and then you'll take the test and be done. Father, I want to thank you for this year. I thank you for each student, each senior in this class. I thank you for those who persevered and watched all the way to the end of their class this year and are joining in this prayer together with me now. I ask you that you would give them wisdom, that you would give them a spirit of caring and loving and discernment. Give them your spirit, Father. Draw them closer to yourself. I pray that they be wise decision makers. I pray that they would be income earners, that they would use the gifts and talents that you've given them to go out and to help our economy prosper, that they would be able to bless their families. I pray that they would be wise consumers. I pray that they'd be voters who are influenced by their belief system and not just pragmatic concerns. I ask you that you'll bless their decision making in the next few years as they pursue careers and choose college majors. I pray that you'd find that we find each of them in careers and in work that is satisfying, that they can do for your honor and glory, that gives them the money that they need to support and feed their families, clothe their families, educate their children, send them to Christian schools, be generous with others, support their churches. And yet I pray, Father, that you also would not have them pursue money as a means to an end, or that they believe that the job with the highest paycheck is the one they should take. Father, just make this class of 2020, which graduated under difficult circumstances, make them go out and influence and change their world for you. May they spread your gospel. Maybe they find healthy marriages. Maybe they always be a part of your church, and that their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren will continue to do the same. May I ask this in your name? Amen.